So now that we've learned earlier was about architecture, then we got into the under the hood meta programming. Now we'll go with a talk on Rubocop to help us actually assist us in getting our code right. Shloka, over to you.
Hello everyone, am I audible? Okay. So, hey, good afternoon, and we'll be discussing about how we can use Rubocop to enhance the code quality of our Ruby code bases. A quick introduction about me. I work as a software engineer at HackerRank. I also share my experiences and experiments with technology in my blog, and I'm a backend developer who does a bit of machine learning as well. Uh, Today is a very special day for me, specifically because I first saw my RubyConFindia video when I was an intern, just starting to learn Ruby. It was always a dream to come and speak at RubyConf. Seems like like the day has come. Really grateful for it. So let's get started. I'll just quickly walk you all through the agenda. So we'll first start with understanding what Rubocop is, like the what and whys of Rubocop. Then take a quick look into the configurations. Then discuss about the to-do approach. And then we'll see, I'll give a demo on how we can modify certain default config of Rubocop. And then I'll talk about the approach that we followed at HackerRank, followed by a discussion on the results that we got, what were some of our learnings, and how we can maintain the standard of our code once we have configured Rubocop. So let's get started. First things first, what is Rubocop? So as most of you might know, Rubocop is the linter based on the official Ruby code style guide. It comes with a lot of default configurations, but at the same time, it provides us with a lot of parameters which are configurable based on our needs. Now we understood what is Rubocop. It's always important to understand the why behind everything. So let's see why we need it. So the first is creating a standard. Now, in a large organization, there are going to be a number of developers, each having their own coding preferences. It's very important that all of us, all the developers within the organization, mutually decide on what are the coding patterns that they want to follow. The next is to ease the process of understanding and reviewing code. Now, code reviews are usually to review the business logic and to understand, is there any security flaw, or in general, to understand the logic. Now, consider a scenario where you submit a PR and there has been empty spaces in it or missing new lines. And suddenly, the focus of reviews just shifts from the logic to discussing about these best practices, which could have been easily avoided if we configured Rubocop in the right way. And the next is definitely following the best practices. That is how I started learning about Rubocop. When I was new to Ruby, I didn't know what were the best practices followed, and that is how I got into Rubocop. So for the next parts of the presentation, I'm going to run some commands and show you how it changes the code in our code base. So this is a quick QR code it contains it's a gist of all the commands I'm going to run. So in case you are interested in following along, you can do that. So first, let's discuss about the essential gems. So there are 5 gems that we need. So first is the default Rubocop gem. The next is Rubocop Capybara, which provides us all the different best practices around Capybara. The next is Rubocop Performance for performance optimization analysis. Then comes Rubocop Rails, and then Rubocop RSpec. So we saw this different gems. So what I'll do is I'll go to this code, and I've just maintained a copy of all the commands in the interest of time. So let me just copy this. This is my gem file, and we have this code linting CLI here. I'll just paste it. Now once this is done, we'll go to the terminal and do a bundle install. Okay, so all our gems have been installed, and we are good to go with the next part. Configurations. So this is how a default .rubocop.yml will look like. We require all the gems that we just included in our gem file. Then there is this part called as all cops, where we define how do we want our Rubocop to behave. Like we write the target Ruby version, And the disable by default is basically we don't want any new cop to be disabled. We want to get updates about it. So those two, the disable by default and new cops enable is for that. Then exclude, so there are certain files in our code base which we don't want to touch because they are like default configuration files, and it's mostly like we don't want to break anything. So for here, like for this example, I have just added node modules, the DB, the bin, and some of the spec files in it. So we'll go back to our, we'll continue with the next part, which is understanding the to-do approach. So imagine that you have a very large code base which started when you didn't have any style guide or anything. And eventually the number of offenses just started increasing. So even the Rubocop provides us with a tool, which is the Rubocop TODO file. What it does is it maintains, like once we generate the command, what it does is it maintains a list of all the offenses across our code. Now how it helps us is like we don't have to fix everything at once. We can eventually fix the mistakes cop by cop as we touch base on that part of the code. So what we are going to do now is we are going to run this command. Now what this command will do is it will generate a default rubocop.yml for us and also a default to-do file which will contain a list of all the offenses across our code. So I'll go back, just copy the command. So as you can see, it's first running the layout line length cop. It will find like what is the maximum line length across the entire code base. And then it will start inspecting all the files across all the different cops that are present. We'll go back here and see that a default Rubocop file has been generated. And we have a to-do file as well, which is still in the process of getting generated. Done. So here you can see that it mentions like for this particular cop, like the ordered gems, this is the particular file which is causing the offense, and this is the offense count. Like there are 12 offenses related to this particular cop. So we'll go back to our Rubocop. So this is the default configuration. Like we haven't added anything that we discussed till now. So what we'll do is we'll copy this entire thing. As I discussed, so by default, when we generate the rubocop.yml, it only includes the default Rubocop gem, but we want to get offenses around these 4 different gems as well. So we'll add a require, and this is a default thing for all the different cops. Now, since we have added new gems, and so we'll have to regenerate our to-do to get new offenses. Going back to our terminal, we'll regenerate the to-do file. Again, the same process will happen. It will run the layout line length cop and then run cop across all the different cops. So while this is getting generated, we can move ahead. And so we saw that how we can create a default configuration file. Now there are Rubocop has some pre-built configurations. Now in the next parts, we are going to see how we can modify the default parameter of a particular cop. We are going to play around with 3 different cops. The first one is the style word array. Now what the Ruby style guide recommends us is to use the percentage format in case of strings which are like a single word. But in case of strings where we have 2 words in it, it recommends us to use the bracket format. Now the default is percentage, but the problem with that is like in a large code base, it's going to be a mix of both strings with 1 word and 2 words, and therefore our code base will contain 2 different patterns. So at HackerRank, we felt like brackets was a much more preferred format for us. Hence, we modified the configuration to brackets. The other reason why we thought of doing it was like brackets is something which is very common across all languages, and we wanted the engineers within our team to be easily able to shift between 2 languages. So that is why we modified the style word array from percent to brackets. So I'll show you how you can do it as well. So here you can see like this is the file. So what we have to do is, first we'll check the Rubocop to-do file and see if there has been any offense around. There has been some, so we'll just delete this part of the code and come back here and write and set the enforce style to be brackets. Now once this is done, we'll run Rubocop again. So what this command does is it runs Rubocop across our entire code base only for this particular cop style word array, and we have set autocorrect to true. So as you can see, like all the 302 offenses which had the percentage format have now shifted to the brackets format. We'll look at this particular file. So here you can see like this has the new brackets format that we had discussed. So this is one way in which we can change the enforced style of a particular cop. Moving next is the matrix method length cop. So what this thing does is it checks the length of the method in our entire code base. The default value that is set is to 10, but it is again configurable based on our needs, and at the same time it comes with other parameters like count as 1 and allowed methods as well. So what we are going to do is we'll go back to our code and see the offense here. So the max value is set to 95, but we'll remove it from here. We'll go to our configuration file and we'll set the count as one. We'll use the count as one parameter. So now what this does is like there are going to be cases where the method consists of arrays, hashes, which spread across multiple lines. So when we add count as 1, what it will do is it will consider array and hashes which are spread across 4 or 5 lines as well as one line only. So we can write here array, hash, and the other one is your doc. So before running this, first let's see like what is the offense count which is already present. So there are 401 offenses. If we want to see, we'll target this one specific file. So here in this file, you can see this function remove statuses. So this has this particular your doc which spreads across like more than 4 or 5 lines. So what we'll do is we'll uncomment this part and we'll run our command again. So you can see the offense count has decreased and this particular remove statuses thing has a lesser number of offense count. Now if we want to change the max value, like the max number of lines that is allowed in a method, we can do it similarly, we can add it here. So when I was doing this, I saw that the usual average value is around 40. So we'll just try changing this to 40. And so you can see like there are 338 offenses. If we run this again, the offense count has decreased because we have changed our max value. So how you can usually decide on the max value is, you can take it as an average of the usual numbers in your entire code base and then eventually decrease the value as you start cleaning up your code more. Now there can be a case where there is some function which is already there and you can't break it down further. So there is another parameter that Rubocop provides us, which is the allowed methods. So now what allowed methods will do is we can add one particular method here and it will ignore all the offenses which are there in this particular method. So if we see here, there is this remove orphans function which has a method length of 95, but we know that this is something that we can't break it down or we don't want to. So we can just copy this function and add it in our allowed methods. Now we'll run the command again. And you can see that that particular method got removed from the offense because we allowed it to have a larger method length. So that is one another way in which you can play around with the default configuration. And the last cop that we'll discuss about is style redundant return. We'll see how we can enable or disable a cop in this example. So in Ruby, the last line in any method is returned by default, but it can be confusing to anyone who is very new to Ruby. Like it happened with me, like when I was starting with it, I didn't knew the last line was returned by default, and I thought that my code had stopped working because of it. So at HackerRank, we preferred adding an explicit return because it just improves the readability of the code. It was again a personal preference that we had among all the developers. So what we'll do is we'll come here and we'll take this particular function. I have the yes. So this particular function, you can see there is this first of value. I'll add an explicit return here. And now what I'll do is I'll run Rubocop. This might take a couple of seconds since it's going through the entire code. Now if I search for style redundant return, it marked it as an offense because we shouldn't add explicit returns based on the official style guide. What we'll do is we'll come back to our configuration and add a style redundant return, and we'll just disable this cop enable false. Now we'll go back and okay, I missed the spelling. One second. Let's wait for it to finish running. Yeah, so now you can see if we search for style, there are no offenses related to it because we disabled the cop in our configuration file. So these were some of the ways in which you can play around with Rubocop and modify the parameters based on your requirements. Now that we have seen how we can modify the default config, I'll quickly walk you through the approach that we took at HackerRank. Like these were the 5 different steps that we used to follow. Like pick up a cop, usually read the documentation and understand like what are the different parameters it provides. We wanted to start with safe autocorrection enabled cops first, then research more on the cop, more in basis on like what are the different ways in which other languages write it as well, and then discuss it with our engineering team because we thought that like the engineers are the people who are going to play around with use these cops daily, and it shouldn't be something that hampers with their productivity. So it was important to get a poll from everyone, and then finally just create a pull request and merge that configuration. So all of this playing around with Rubocop, and so we'll see like what the results. So this is how our technical debt changed over time. Like as we started cleaning up our to-do file and playing around more with Rubocop, we saw a decrease in our decrease in our technical debt from around 8% to 2%. So like we discussed about a lot of things. So let's quickly see like what were some of my learnings when I worked with Rubocop. So first is to understand the why. Like we need to understand that we are not doing all of this to make Rubocop happy, but all of this is done so that it just increases the productivity of us and overall maintainability and readability of our code. The next is avoiding false positives. Like in general in this code cleanup and technical debt removal, we need to make sure that we don't make anything that just decreases the productivity of the developers. It usually becomes like when we ask everyone to go back and fix the old code, it becomes a lot of it becomes an extra thing on their plate. But always expecting new, like good new code is fine. And the last is engage with the developers because they are the end users in this case. So we made all the changes in the Rubocop config. Now how do we maintain the standard going forward? The first is using pre-commit hooks. As soon as before committing something, use pre-commit hooks that will run Rubocop and autocorrect the cops that support safe autocorrection. Next, use code quality inspection tools like GitHub Actions, Code Climate, Sonar Cube, which where you can just make it a mandatory check that the configuration should pass before you merge it to master. And the next is keeping Rubocop updated. Like every update in Rubocop might come with some new gems, new cops, so keeping it updated. So yeah, like as we approach to the end of the talk, I hope like this helps you in maintaining a clean to-do file with a 0 offense count. And yeah, that's it. Thank you all for tuning in. And this is a this is the link QR code to all my social handles. I look forward to connect with you all and hear about your Rubocop journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Shloka. We have time for maybe a couple of questions. All right, straight away.
Hello.
Hey.
As you said that we can disable Rubocop for a particular method.
Yeah.
In the rubocop.yml file.
Yes.
But instead, if we do it in the main file, that RB file, and we write Rubocop disable and the Rubocop that we want to disable, maybe style.
Yeah.
So that will be much explanatory than disabling it in the YML file.
So there are two ways in which we can disable. Like one is the way I showed you, like you just add the allowed methods. And the other one is the way you mentioned, like you write in the, so for example, there is a something.rb and there is one particular method. So you can write enable and disable on top of it, but that is usually preferred when you have some function name which is very common, like an index function. So index function is something which will be very common in different controllers. So at that particular time, you can manually write like enable or disable on top of that function. But if that function name is unique, it's usually good if you can directly write in the configuration, like the default config file itself.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, your offense count has come to 0. All right, thank you so much,
Thank
Shloka.
you.